Well, the past couple weeks on the Communicators program here on C-SPAN, we've looked at the issue of reclassifying broadband services from Title I to Title II. 2 weeks ago, we talked with industry folks about their position on this issue, and last week we talked with Robert McDowell, the ranking Republican on the FCC. And this week we are joined by two members of Congress to get their perspective on the issue of reclassifying broadband services. We are joined by David Hatch of Congress Daily, who will be joining in the questioning, and right now John Shimkus, a Republican of Illinois and a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has oversight of the FCC, is joining us from Capitol Hill. Congressman Shimkus, why are you opposed to reclassifying broadband from Title I to Title II?
Well, first of all, people have to really establish if there's really a problem. There is no problem right now. The internet has been the really boom engines for job and the economy for decades now, well, a decade. We're afraid that as the national government intervenes to make decisions to control the pipes, that there'll be less intervention, less job creation, and it's, this whole telecom act is like 1933 regulation, and trying to bring it to and use those laws to enforce the digital age is crazy talk.
Congressman, Democrats in both chambers have announced plans to update the Communications Act. Do you support that effort, and is there any chance that telecom legislation could emerge this year?
Well, not this year, but I mean the last Telecom Act rewrite took about 6 to 8 years. It's important that we've been talking about it even when Republicans are in majorities, because the FCC is broken up and they're stovepiped into an environment that doesn't reflect the digital age. So I'd be very excited about it. I think it would help the FCC, even in their day-to-day management of businesses, of when they can talk to each other, when they cannot, talking about the new technology today and getting a new look at it. It is timely, but that just shows you how quickly this industry moves, because 96 Telecom Act is now, you need to address the FCC for a new era.
Congressman Shimkus, does the FCC, is this a backdoor way, in your view, of getting net neutrality legislation?
You're right. How'd you guess? Exactly what they want to do. And the problem that we have with that is if you're a capitalist and you believe in supply and demand, what they want to do is have the government control what I'm going to call the pipes, and let the government determine what gets sent over lines and be the cop, versus allowing the competitive market and the capitalist system. And if the pipes eventually become constrained, which they're not now, so there's no issue now, we want to incentivize the build out of more pipes and more jobs. It's really kind of the real national debate here in Washington: centralized control, decisions made out of Washington, versus freeing up the private sector to meet the needs of Americans. And that's why my subcommittee on telecommunications is so exciting. It just moves too fast. New things happening way before government can get its hands around it, and that's the benefit of its growth.
Congressman, as a quick follow-up to my question, if there is going to be telecom legislation, what would you want it to accomplish?
Well, I think, this whole convergence of voice, video, data, and the stovepipe situations at FCC really need to be converged, where you don't, this Title I, Title II debate is a perfect example of how reforming the Telecom Act, what you can't do is take data information and now do it under Title II, which was how we regulated Ma Bell from rotary dial phone to rotary dial phone. That's the law, that's Title II, and now they want to do that for data services, where you have internet service providers and different folks, and to break out data flows differently. It's not in a straight line path. That's why you got to give the good minds of today, and we want more freedom for innovation, and we don't want government control.
Congressman Shimkus, but as broadband becomes the new national medium, do you think there is a case to be made for regulating it, such as the telephone companies were regulated for years?
Well, it depends on if you believe regulation lower costs and provides better, higher quality service. And of course, competitive market capitalists believe that if you want higher quality service at the lowest cost, you got to incentivize competition. What a role for government is to prevent monopolies and duopolies and people having so much control that then they are able to exert market pressure to provide less services and higher costs. But as long as you can make the case that you've got a vibrant competitive market where people are trying to give higher quality service at lower cost, we shouldn't be involved.
Congressman, as you know, there have been reports this week that FCC officials have been meeting privately with telecom industry executives to possibly broker a legislative deal. Should the agency be trying to seek a compromise with the industry, or has it overstepped its bounds?
Well, I think, again, this is really kind of the debate now that we're talking about here in Washington right now, where is there a legislative process? Is there a role for policy debate, law signed by the president, and then you empower the regulators versus the regulators or someone else cutting the deal through the regulatory aspect? And we have a separation of power in our Constitution for a reason. We do not want the executive branch to overstep its ability through the regulatory regime of changing U.S. law through the regulatory process.
Congressman, do you think that when you say that, do you think Congress needs to have a role? Is that part of the argument against the FCC moving forward with what they're calling the third way?
That's exactly. I mean, that's the whole issue of let's rewrite FCC and the Telecom Act. Let's restructure the current law of the land, which then gives guidance to the FCC. We shouldn't have the FCC promulgating rules that might be subverting the current law of the land.
Congressman, FCC Chairman Janikowski says that his third way proposal is a compromise that would exempt broadband carriers from most regulations that would normally apply under Title II of the Communications Act. Do you agree with his assessment that his approach actually would amount to light touch regulation?
My point is that Janikowski doesn't have that authority to establish the third wave through the regulatory regime. Our point is, if we want to do that, that should be through the legislative process. They are to enact and enforce the law, and if the law is outdated, we don't manipulate the process through the regulatory regime to create new rules and regulations that are, as the courts have ruled already in some of this debate, that subverts the law of the land. And so let's get the FCC's input on a rewrite that maybe we all can agree.
282 members of Congress have already written a letter to the FCC expressing opposition to the FCC moving forward. There's been 2 different letters sent. Action is moving forward on this issue, and in fact, Commissioner McDowell told us last week that by September they hope to be moving into the decision mode. Will Congress act before then?
I doubt it because, of course, you've got Chairman Waxman and Ed Markey and those who really want to push the net neutrality debate and really do not want to intervene. I mean, elections have consequences, and even the president's really had the position of net neutrality as he ran. So taking that all together, again, I think who ought to be angry and frustrated is this bipartisan group with 2 different letters. I think there's, 60 Democrats, and we have about 170 Republicans, the vast majority of the House of Representatives saying not to do this, and they're subverting the will of the legislative branch because they're usurping our authority through the regulatory regime.
Congressman John Shimkus is a Republican from Illinois. He serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee and specifically on the Commerce Subcommittee on Communications. We're joined also on the Communicators by David Hatch of Congress Daily. Next question.
Congressman, just as a quick follow-up on Mr. Janikowski's third way proposal, since you find that so objectionable, is there an alternative that you support that would give the FCC the regulatory certainty that it needs to move forward with broadband regulation?
Well, I'm not sure what regulatory authority they need. First, I would ask, where's the problem? And where's the outcry? And even the 3 cases of individuals who claimed a problem even in some of the national storylines, resolve their problems by going to a different ISP, or it resolved between the ISP and the company. So they have not made the case this is a problem. This is a political debate by major interest on the West Coast that it helps support the Democrat Party, and so that's why they're moving on this agenda. We've been asking, show us where there's a problem. There's not a problem right now in this whole net neutrality debate.
Who are those political interests, Mr. Shimkus?
You know who they are. You know, our friends at Google are one of the major, focuses, and they have their interest, and I support the right to people to collectively organize, to air their grievances, and get the government changed. So I'm not disputing their right to do that. They have supporters and allies, and that's what this is about.
David Hatch.
Congressman, as you know, the House and Senate Commerce Committees have scheduled a session for tomorrow on Friday that is basically a stakeholder session with telecom industry representatives to discuss the prospects for legislation. Were Republicans fully included in the planning for this, and what do you hope to accomplish with that session?
Well, the answer is I don't know the answer. I mean, if my staff has given a heads up and we're invited to that the stakeholders meeting, then I have not been told that. It's an interesting thing. Everybody has great respect for Rick Boucher. He says the right things. He wants to be inclusive. Sometimes he's more inclusive than others. Telecom crosses across the partisan line, just like the letter you mentioned. A whole bunch of Democrats signed one, a whole bunch of Republicans. The good thing about energy and commerce is more regional than partisan. It's something we can do. I just don't know if I'm invited.
Does this, in your view, this process, that the Title I, Title II process, affect the National Broadband Plan implementation?
I think just on the periphery. I mean, the National Broadband based upon the stimulus bill and the mapping, and then the underserved debate, it could then eventually go into how do you then regulate the internet. And that's what we think it is. It's government intervening in deciding who gets access when, or maybe eventually raising funds for the deployment of that, when we've already spent, and it's questionable, the billions of dollars we've done for broadband deployment without a broadband map. The California Communication Commissioner basically told me twice that you're foolhardy to spend money for broadband deployment if you haven't mapped. Well, we haven't finished mapping yet, and we're already sending out billions of dollars to compete with already established broadband providers. So it's a frustrating time here in Washington.
David Hatch, final question.
There has been talk about a possible appropriations rider to block the FCC from using its funding to implement both Mr. Janikowski's third way proposal and his proposed changes on net neutrality. Is that something that you will actively support?
Oh, yeah, but first of all, we have to say, Chairman Spratt said in 2006, if you can't budget, you can't govern. We don't have a budget. If you don't have a budget, how do you do appropriations? I think the plan is to wait till after the election to try to make the tough choices. So this is all overcome by events. But if we did have an appropriation bill, of course, that is a way in which we can stop through the funding stream the FCC from doing something that we think would be, I don't know if it's the right word, of extra legal, not based upon the FCC Act, but based upon their own views of how they want to change the Telecom Act through regulation.
Congressman John Shimkus, Republican of Illinois, thank you for being on the Communicators to talk about this issue.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.